G'day guys, and welcome back to my OzzyOcker Workbench build. Today we're going to be drilling a few holes for dog holes up the top here and down the side of the legs. We're going to cut in a groove along the bottom edge of this front rail for a sliding dead man, and then we're also going to drill holes in here for the drawbore and then assemble these two frames.
Now first up, I want to run a groove into the underside of the upper front rail to accept the sliding dead man. Now the router bit grabs the timber right at the start there. That's because I'm cutting too deep. The reason why I'm cutting so deep is because the router bit won't actually go down any further. That's as low as I can get it, so I'm taking a big risk cutting so deeply at the start. I got it done though, but it did chew up the timber a fair bit. So a better way of doing it is to use a router with an edge guide and just go across the top of it like that. You can lower it down nice and easy, nice and gentle with the plunge router. I should have done that. I know better, I just didn't want to do it. So I've done it in 3 passes, the first at 15mm deep or thereabouts, and then another 2 at about 5mm deep. The last 2 worked a lot better than the first, that's for sure. And then because of the first pass that chewed up the edges, I'm just going to tap that edge backwards. Make sure you go backwards, because you don't want to unintentionally climb cut this thing. If you go backwards, you'll be cutting the front edge of your groove. If you bring your fence forwards, you'll end up cutting the back edge of the groove and you'll end up climb cutting accidentally. So it's a little bit laborious drilling all these holes through these legs. They're quite thick, it takes quite a long time to get down to the bottom. I can't wait to have to do this to the 2 top panels. It's going to take me all day. So as I move along with this build and I'm about ready to start assembling certain components, some of these faces become inaccessible with a hand plane after assembly, like the inside faces of these legs. So I'm going to smooth them out with a hand plane now, and I've decided that I'm going to use this workbench as a practice piece or a test piece to practice finishing the surfaces with a hand plane without using any sandpaper, because usually I'll use a hand plane and then I'll just use a bit of 240 grit just to even out the surface just that little bit. But for this workbench I'm just going to hand plane it, and then I'm going to apply finish directly to whatever surface I have, which at the end of the day it's not that bad usually. So it should work out pretty good. Now this here is a good example as to why I need this new bench. All of this timber here is unsupported. All of that timber here is unsupported. I have to stand here and then reach over there. Oh, it's going to be great when I've got a real workbench. But until then, I'll just take a shaving off here.
Alright, so now with these dog holes drilled out through the legs and this top front rail, I can now drawbore these joints together. Now drawboring, it's a technique to bore a hole through the joint and then draw it together, so drawboring. So it's done in a few steps. So first off, you create your mortise and tenon, nice and easy, and then you'll drill a couple of holes straight through the mortise or straight through the side of the leg, through the mortise and out the other side again, so straight through. The tenon wasn't in there when I've done that. Then you can assemble the joint just dry assemble the joint over here. You make sure you put a clamp over here to make sure that that shoulder is pulled up hard against the leg. We don't want any gap in there at this point in time, because that's where we want this joint to finish. We want it to finish there, nice and tight. It looks beautiful at the moment. And you'll see at the bottom there, I've got two little dimple points at the bottom of those two holes there. What I've done there is I've got the same drill bit that I've used to drill out these two holes, and because of that sharp point at the bottom, I can put that into there and then just give it a little dimple point. That marks the exact center of these holes here. Then I can disassemble that joint. Then I can see these 2 points here. Now what I want to do is, I don't want to drill right in on those points. What I want to do is I want to move that point forward towards this shoulder. Just a little bit, not too much. This is where you can make a big mistake. So then we've moved that dimple mark forwards a little bit. Then we've gone through and drilled straight through the tenon at that new dimple mark that we've made, which offsets those holes. When we try to put this dowel through that hole, because of that offset, this dowel it's actually going to have to bend its way through, creating a bit of spring tension. So this dowel will forever be trying to pull that tenon back into the shoulder like that. Now that's where you can go wrong. You could have offset those holes by a massive amount, doing it like this, for example. And then you're trying to bend this stick all the way through there, which will create a tremendous amount of spring tension. If you don't break this dowel, in all likelihood you will break that dowel in this example here, but let's just say that you were able to do that for a second. There would be a huge amount of force going that way. And what will end up happening, if you didn't break that dowel, but in this example you will, but if you didn't break that dowel, you'll end up popping this bit of timber straight out. It will split along here, and it'll just stick out the back here. You have to make sure that there's enough meat behind this hole that it can withstand the pressure that you're going to put onto it. Furthermore, the amount that you adjust this hole forwards this way affects how much pressure you're going to put onto it. So I'm only going to put a small amount of forwards movement onto this hole, like at most 1.5 millimeters, but ideally I'd actually only be aiming for about 0.8 of a millimeter forwards. Rub out all these lines so that I'm not confusing myself. And then I just want to make a mark with pencil as to where that current mark is. It gives me a point in space so that if I get confused, I know where I started at least. From there, I can get a brad awl with a sharp point. And what I do is I put it right on that point, and I want to bring it straight back. I don't want to bring it back on an angle this way or that way. I want to bring it straight back. If you bring it back on an angle this way or that way, when you assemble the joint will want to move up or down just that little bit. If it can't move up and down a little bit, you're actually putting side pressure on this timber here, and it's a bit like getting a chisel and taking it straight down the end grain and splitting it open. Another bad thing. So you want to go straight back. So like I said, I don't want to go back far. So I've got that point just behind my line there. You can see I've got 2 points there. There's not much in it, but there's enough. Then I want to re-establish that point. So that'll be nice and good. Same again on the other side. Not much. So that's it there. So that's how I do it. So now I can drill out these holes, reassemble the joint, and I should see a significant offset when I look straight down the hole of the mortise.
Whoops, I forgot to support the back side of the tenon. That'll stop the tenon from blowing out as the drill bit exits the hole.
Alright, so it's pulled up tight. Take this clamp off now. So I'm pretty sure you can see that those two holes have been offset a little bit. Now I got pretty lucky here, they're located vertically pretty well. This hole is very good, so I'll give him a big old tick, tick. This one's no good, I'll give him a cross. Now why it's no good is because I've got a lot of meat on the back of that tenon there. So when I try to put the dowel through here and bend it around, it's going to put too much force on that back of that tenon here, and it's going to pop that out there. So what I want to do is I just want to make a mark on the back of this tenon at the back of the hole there. Then I can get a file in there and shave down some of the back of that hole just to reduce the amount of offset that I've got onto it. So hopefully that was a good explanation of drawboring and how to do it and how to fix things. So that's good, that's good. Bad, bad. That's not great. So next up we need to cut some dowels to length, and we need to taper the first little bit so that it can go into the hole nice and gently. So here I've got two tapers. I've got a very long taper and a very short taper. Now this short taper can work, but what it effectively does is when you put it into the hole and you tap it in there, you effectively go from 0 to 100 in one tap. Whereas with this gentle taper here, when I put it into the hole, I give it a tap, it goes in a little bit. I give it another tap, it goes in a little bit more. I give it another tap, it goes into a little bit more. So it brings up that pressure on that back bit of the tenon that I've been talking about gradually. It's much better than trying to punch your way through. So I'm all ready to glue this thing up. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to glue this thing up in stages. I don't have to get all 4 joints done immediately. So what I can do is I can join this first joint, put a clamp over it, let the glue go off a little bit. Then I'll come back and I'll do this second joint. I'll put a clamp over it, let the glue go off a bit. From there I can move to the other side and bring the leg up onto the lower rail and the top rail at once and clamp it all up. And when I do that, I'll make sure that I get it into my template here, make sure that it all squares itself up just right, the way that I want it. And because of that, when I drive these pegs through, I'm going to be driving straight down. I've cut some holes into my template there so that the peg, when it sticks out the other end, has somewhere to go. I can move this off the side of my bench and just stick it straight through there. All right, let's do this. So I run a bead of glue down this side, a bead of glue down that side, and with a paddle pop stick or ice cream stick, spread the glue around as best you can. Now you don't want to go crazy on glue, because if you put too much, it just won't go into the hole. So with that done there, I'll just put a little bit on these tenon cheeks, just so I know that there was glue there at some point. Now we want to get these in there nice and tight. So I've got two choices. I'll hammer it in. Now, even though when I put these pins through there, that should draw the joint tight, I'm going to put a clamp over there anyway, just because it's way better to do so. Make sure it's all pulled up tight, looks pretty good. Pretty happy with that. Drag it off the edge of the bench. Send some glue down the hole. Maybe put a bit of glue on here as well. Bit of lubrication. Oh, what an idiot. Crying out loud. And a hammer. Oh, I didn't have a hammer. Yes, I do. All right, gently Bentley. We don't want it to go smack. We want to get in there eventually. So then we check our joint, looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Now, because this is drawboard, technically I can take that clamp off. However, what would be the point of that? I'm going to sit here, I'm going to let it sit there for 30 minutes or so anyway, so I'll just come back later and take the clamp off because it's not doing any harm at the moment. That leaves me just enough to chisel off and I can get a nice clean finish. Clamp actually shook free. That's okay. It wasn't doing much anyway. So what I'm going to do, once I've got the glue inside the mortise there, I'm going to set it up with the tenons slightly in the mortises. I'm going to get them closed as tight as I possibly can. From there, I'm going to put clamps over the top of it and squeeze them together, rather than picking this whole thing up, standing in it here and hitting on the top. Because when I hit on the top, there's a good chance that I start twisting this way off square. And at the moment, because this is such a long rail compared to the joint itself, I have a huge amount of leverage against that joint. So if I start pounding on it from the top off square, I'm actually just going to break this joint. Like, it might be drawboard, it might be well and truly glued, but if I put that much leverage against it, I'll just snap the timber and there's nothing I can do about it. So if I just put a clamp over the top of it and draw it together with the clamp pressure, nice and square, keeping everything in line with my template, everything should just pull up nicely. No breaks, no cracks, a little bit of stress, but not that much. So let's do it. Get them both started as best I can. That's it. That's all I got. What you got to keep doing before you get them shouldered up, you got to make sure you try to not let them sit there like I'm doing right now. Because the glue is currently creating all of that stiction and you won't be able to move the bloody thing later. For crying out loud. I'll undo those clamps and this should fit into my template now. Should just drop in there. That's in, that's in, that's in. Get him hard down to that side over there. Yeah, so from here, because I've got everything shouldered up, I can relax a little bit, but I still need to get those pins in there while the glue is wet. Otherwise, I'm wasting my time. I'll pull him off so I can get those pins in, put a bin under there so I can catch all the glue that I'm about to squeeze through.
So you have to take it easy when you're putting the dowels in. You just want constant firm taps without going too hard, because you'll just split the dowel straight down the guts. So you just want to tap, 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 nice and gently, nice and firmly, just to make sure that you get it in there without breaking the dowel off or splitting it. And you want to stop just before you hit that puddle of glue, because otherwise you're basically stomping inside a puddle. It throws it everywhere.
So this is good. It's actually really good. I'm really happy with it. It's fitting into my template nice and evenly. I've got a little gap along this side here, or I can put it on that side and I'll show you. And that's because I took a few shavings off the inside faces of these legs, which actually reduces the width of it just that little bit. I didn't take much off it, but it's enough to move things just that little bit, but not enough to make it a problem. So there's a little gap between the front panel and the template just there, only a little bit, less than 1 millimeter, and pretty much the same on that side as well. So it's not too bad. It's actually, what I've ended up with is something very, very close to my template, which is something pretty close to what my computer drawing is. It's not too bad. I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to call it quits on this video now. I'll leave you with the glue up for the second panel, where I'm going to have to glue that directly on top of this one here, because I want them both to be the same. And once again, I want my, what is this? This is the left leg, so I'm going to have the rear left leg built directly on top of that. So that way the two frames just separate, and if they're twisted this way or that way, doesn't matter, because they're both twisted the same. And that means, it just means the top will be slightly off parallel to the ground. By slightly, I mean very minorly. So remember, I have plans available for purchase on my website. There'll be a link in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, if you thought it was pretty good, if you understood anything more about drawboring, that's great. Make sure you click the thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, because this build is getting interesting now. Can't wait for this top to go on there. It's going to be so good. Anyway, thanks very much, and I'll catch you next time.